It's been quite the year. It's been fantastic. I think for every low carb fan in Scandinavia, because it's been getting so popular. In Sweden, in particular, and in Norway and Finland, our neighbors, low carb is getting more and more popular every month. It seems like,
Oh yeah, I mean,
in the papers, in TV, and yeah,
did
it's
did it
crazy.
did it start in Sweden and kind of branch out, or has it just been a simultaneous explosion happening all over the Scandinavian countries?
I think it started in Sweden a couple of years earlier, but I mean, there are physicians and other people promoting low carb in Norway and Finland too, who's
Right.
been doing it for a long time. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's been going on, but getting this kind of popular, it kind of started in Sweden in 2008, and in Norway and Finland, I think this year, basically, it's exploded there too.
I was looking the other day, there was a news story that talked about the most popular searches for Google in Sweden in
Yeah,
2011,
yeah,
and
that's
one of
funny too.
them was low carb, high fat. I bet that brought a
Sure.
big smile to your face.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been getting, like I said, more popular every year. So it's bound to end up in the top 10 lists of Google sooner or later. Now it did.
Congratulations. That is
So
just so
that's good.
neat.
It's pretty amusing too, because we've been getting a shortage of butter in Sweden this fall,
Yes.
and now in December it hit Norway really really hard. So I mean, they've had really desperate shortage of butter in Norway last month or so. Like, you can't find it anywhere.
Oh, and the
Interesting.
Colbert Report. Did you see that
Yeah, I saw that's funny.
video with him eating a stick of butter and then he buttered the
Yeah,
butter and
yeah,
but you know what? This can't be anything but good. I know they're trying to mock it and say, "Oh, look at all that artery clogging saturated fat they're eating with the butter," but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
got to
sure.
be a good thing. I'm sure it's making some people, especially here in America, going, "Well, wait a minute. You know what? Why are they short on butter? Isn't butter supposed to give you heart attacks?" And yet, we don't see that really happening a lot there.
No, it's going to be interesting to see in the coming years if this popularity for low carb, high fat keeps up in Scandinavia. We're going to be able to see and track the number of heart attacks. We're going to be able to track the obesity rates. What if the obesity rate starts going down in
Hmm.
Scandinavia while they're still rising everywhere else?
You'll definitely manufacture some from protein. So that's what everyone who eats low carb will do.
Right.
Um, your body wants to get on the order of 30% of all its macronutrient calories from glucose, and it will manufacture protein to try to get close to that. So even if you eat zero carb, you'll be manufacturing maybe 20-25% of your calories from protein, turning them
Right.
into glucose.
Right.
But your body will still try to conserve protein, and especially if you're not eating that much, if you're not eating 25% of calories as protein, then you've got a serious problem. Um, your body may cannibalize itself for a little while, and you'll lose muscle, but at some point that has to stop.
Hmm.
And so then what happens? Uh, Another substitute for glucose is something called ketones, which can
Right.
be made from fats or from some amino acids. And so your body will generate ketones and use those as a substitute for glucose. But you'll be in what's called the starvation response. That your body will respond to that shortage of glucose and protein the same way that it responds to starvation. You'll have all kinds of hormonal adjustments, like lower thyroid hormone levels, um, and your cells will be instructed to conserve the amount of glucose they use, to use less. And since glucose is an important structural element in cells, it has a wide variety of functions in the body. That conservation of glucose comes with some sacrifices. It will impair the functioning of the cells, and it'll affect your health to some degree.
Hmm.
And so, very low carb diets are kind of a new dietary practice, and there isn't really a lot of long-term knowledge of what happens.
One of the things that struck me that was interesting is an awful lot of people wrote me with questions that went along the lines of, Dr. So-and-so says this, Dr. Such and Such says that. What do you say about whatever the question was? And this was interesting to me because there was a certain appeal to authority, which is not typical in the diabetes community, but seems to be much more characteristic of the diet community.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps the reason is that people in the diabetes community have had such terrible experiences with doctors that you have more cred when you aren't one.
So you're further along than my community would be, who's more concerned about losing weight and maybe improving certain metabolic health markers than people that are trying to keep their blood sugar and insulin under control.
Well, I think it's that people that are trying to deal with diabetes have more interaction with doctors, and they've learned just how ignorant they can often be about metabolic issues, whereas diet people tend to be healthier, and they see a book and it says Dr. So-and-so, and they're immediately impressed. It was interesting because you list the other people that were on your show, and most of them are people who have published mainstream books and have that MD credential.
Yep.
But the interesting thing to me is I've actually gotten to the point now where I've been offered the opportunity to publish with mainstream publishers, but I don't take it because what I learned when I interacted with them is they want everything dumbed down.
Yep.
And to me, what makes it helpful the reason I write a book is I want to give people information that's more than they can find in a single web page, and more than can be put into the soundbite, and that isn't something you can do on Good Morning America in 3 minutes, which says, the cause of everything is A, and the solution to everything is this 25-word sentence I'm about to give you. So I kind of came away kind of a little entertained by the idea of people wanting me to make pronouncements on, you should use this supplement, you should eat that food, you should use this sweetener, when my whole message is you should test things and see what they do for you. And not look to authorities.
Exactly.
Because, I
was going to say, it sounds like people with diabetes kind of have a better BS meter.
Well, they also have a blood sugar meter.
Well, that too.
Which means that they can actually test something.
Right.
Dr. A says you should eat such and such. You eat it. You see what it does to your blood sugar. You feel how you feel after you ate it. You watch what happens to whatever other parameters you're looking at, whether it's weight or your cholesterol or whatever. And then you have the answer whether this works for you or not.
People need to know it's not only about calories. Calories are a minor. You know this. Calories really are not that important. Yeah. The essential point to know about wheat is that wheat contains the protein gliadin, and gliadin serves as a very powerful appetite stimulant. I think, Jimmy, that this was an inadvertent change in wheat that developed with all the genetic changes introduced in the 70s. In other words, the geneticists working in the 60s and 70s were trying to increase the yield of this crop, as they had with other crops. And they were very successful in generating a 2-foot-tall, high-yield, semi-dwarf variant of wheat, no longer a 4.5-foot-tall plant. Well, I believe, inadvertently, because I have no proof that it was intentional, inadvertently they changed the gliadin protein. We do know the gliadin protein is different. That's established fact in the genetics literature. But I believe they did not recognize that the changes introduced in the amino acid structure of gliadin turned it into a much more potent appetite stimulant. But I tell you who I think caught on real quickly: smart food scientists. When they started to see increased calorie consumption, average calorie consumption goes up 400 calories per day when you consume wheat. And they saw this because and they started putting it into everything. They put it into licorice, they put it into salad dressing, they put it in soup. Virtually every processed food on the store shelf has wheat flour, whether or not it's important for taste or texture. I think it's there because I think smart food scientists caught on quickly, and when pressured to increase revenues, put wheat in everything. And you know what, Jimmy? It worked. It worked. It increased calorie consumption nationwide, 400 calories per day. We saw this all started around the mid-'80s. and we saw a gradual increase in calorie consumption. We saw weight climb with it. Now we're seeing the downstream diabetic consequences.
Right.
And as you know, we're in the world's worst epidemic of diabetes ever witnessed in the history of man on Earth.
Oh, but Dr. Davis, they put the word enriched in front of it, and it's supposed to make it sound better.
Well, you raise a very good point, Jimmy. And there's a common flaw. Now, this seems painfully obvious to you and me, but until you point it out, people often are lulled into this kind of thinking. And that is, the nutritionists have fallen for this flawed logic. If you take something bad for you, in this case, white flour, and you replace it with something less bad for you, whole wheat or whole grains, and there's an apparent health benefit, and there is. There is a health benefit. There is less colon cancer, heart disease, and diabetes when you do that. Well, then a whole bunch of less bad things must be good for you. So if unfiltered Tareyton cigarettes are bad for you, and filtered Salem cigarettes are less bad for you, you and I should smoke at least a pack of Salems a day. That is the deeply flawed sequence of logic that dominates a lot of nutritional thinking.
People are frustrated by all the information they've been given their whole life. You know, most people who are in your situation and my situation, Jimmy, formerly obese, have been on every diet, you know, in the world. We've done just about everything that every expert's told us to do. And what happens is you lose the weight and it comes back, and you get real frustrated. With the leptin prescription and with, you know, how I eat, you know, daily now, the one thing I can guarantee people who are not in, you know, optimal condition is they will notice a significant change if they follow this recommended path to eating, because this is not a diet. It's I don't even think it's a lifestyle. I call it brain surgery without a scalpel, and it works.
I love it. Spoken like a true neurosurgeon.
Well, but I mean, it's you know, I kind of laid out in the blog this year, you know, how I came up with it, and it's kind of, you know, it's a 10 or 15 year process of how I thought about it. There was a lot of, you know, influential things that I've learned, and you know, when I first came up with it, I thought it was pretty radical, and I obviously didn't tell anybody about it. I just did it on myself.
Yeah.
And when it worked, I was like, you know, this is kind of interesting. And then several of my patients said, hey, would you consider, you know, letting me do the same thing? And I had about 10 people the first year I did it on, and every single one of them came back. And, you know, some of the stories, you know, their clinical stories will be released in the blog at some point over time, but there's some huge home runs that have happened. I mean, we got 84-year-old ladies, you know, that have lost 80 pounds now have six-packs.
Wow.
And, you know, one of my
84-year-old has a six-pack?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's just kind of like really impressive stuff. And
Holy
you know,
cow.
when you start hearing about this kind of stuff, it almost sounds, you know, unbelievable until you physically do it. And one of the cool things that happened, you know, after I did the podcast with you, is people took Rob Wolf's book and Mark Sisson's book and married them to the leptin prescription. And, you know, we've got like a 650,000 hit thread on Mark's site.
Wow.
With people posting their results about how this has gone. And I think the other thing that people kind of like about me is that when you ask me a question on my blog, I answer you.
Yep.
I try to answer everybody's blog comments, because I think it's important, because I think one of the things that's also true, and I think you can speak to this as well, is that patients are frustrated with their doctors. They're not getting the answers that they want.
That's right.
And, you know, I know that's true because I used to be a patient who went through the same thing they did. And when I felt that this was the answer, I said, you know, I have a duty to answer the questions that people have about this.